true to myself is this process of reclamation that is more valuable than an attachment to another who requires me to be a deceptive or less than complete version of myself. And that's the choice that we get asked to make over and over and over again.
Welcome, everybody, to this very first edition of the new Self-Love Series, a segment of the Vegan Posse dedicated to expanding our tenderness, affection, curiosity, and general delight in one very important animal, ourselves. So, as a lot of people listening know, I'm a writer, and my debut novel, Marrying Myself, was released in November of 2022. So that book is fiction, and it's a fun read with lots of romantic components, but it highlights that at the end of the day, our most important relationship is the one we have with ourselves. So as someone who, for a lot of my own life, wasn't my own biggest fan, I found that learning to love myself and be true to me has to be my number one priority. So I'm now in the process of creating a self-love playbook, kind of a marrying myself companion guide, which will also likely become a course. And right now in this Vegan Posse series, I'm taking advantage of all of the amazing women who've been guests on the Vegan Posse, who I think have something to offer on the subject of self-love. So I just realized that I'm in speaker view, not gallery view. So this way we can see beautiful Jen Howk, even while she's not talking.
And my dogs.
And your dogs,
Yeah.
your dogs. Yes, that's crucial.
Yeah.
So as many people listening know, Jen Howk is a political scientist, evolutionary psychology coach, and custodian of an ever-expanding permaculture food forest and plant nursery in the Blue Ridge Mountains. She's been vegan for over 15 years, and she's here today to talk about self-love. So Jen, welcome. We launch every episode of the Vegan Posse by asking, are you ready for the ride of your life? But since this is the self-love series, Jen, I'll ask you, are you ready for the love of your life?
Yes, yeah, of course, always.
Great.
No, this is great. I love that you're doing this.
Yeah. So let's just jump right into the concept of self-love. How do you see the self-love theme in your own life? And have you had any self-love turning points?
Yeah, I think I haven't necessarily been calling it by that name, but it really does strike at the heart of a lot of what I've been thinking about myself lately, which is this kind of disconnect between the extent to which we are living for other people, or we are living by other people's expectations and standards, and how much of that can just be left over from our early childhood and adolescent experience and continue to influence our life for decades and decades and decades without any kind of meaningful self-reflection. And at what point does one start to reclaim oneself back from all of those other people's expectations, all of those other people's demands, and often not even specific expectations or demands, but just what we sort of infer that they expect or demand of us. We're just playing a guessing game all the time, and we're offering up versions of ourselves that we think that other people want, or we think that are going to in the parlance of evolutionary psychology, qualify for other people, whether it's for a friendship or for a romantic relationship. We're playing this game of imagining we think we know better than even they do which version of us it is that would satisfy that need for them. And so we do all of this self-suppression and this impression management and this let me put myself into some kind of container to offer myself up on a platter to you in the way that I think is going to be most pleasing. And this is, you know, depending on what circles you run in psychologically, we would call this codependence, or we would call it people pleasing. And so I've been very, very interested as somebody who's been susceptible to a lot of these patterns throughout my life, and just, yeah, reclaiming myself, finding, you know, sorting out what of myself am I giving away? Where is the real self? Where is this false self that I'm trying to give to people? All of those questions have been super present in my life lately. Yeah.
Yeah, I relate to all of that so much. And I find this weird paradox in my own life and my own authenticity that often I'm most myself, and in some ways my best self with people who are either strangers or who I'm not particularly impressed with, you know, and so therefore I don't care what they think. So
Yeah.
I just kind of give myself full reign. Whereas with people that I do care about and I do desire their approval and their respect, you know, then I become a little more stilted and, you know, caught up in the ego trap. It is, especially if I feel that they've given me some approval,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then I, you know, fall into that ego trap of being reluctant to continue to engage because I don't want that positive impression to change.
Yeah, now you have something to lose. If you've
Now you
gotten
have
a
something
little
to
positive
lose.
feedback from someone,
Yeah.
it's scarier to lose that little breadcrumb, that little shred of approval from them, than to take a chance on losing it all if they discover something about you that they don't like. Now you're back at square one, and
Right.
so it's this paradox that often the people that we are closest to are the people that we are the least true to ourselves, and the least in self-love around, because we are so hooked into what it is that we think that they want. Yeah,
Right, right. And as you mentioned so many times, it's not even what they really want. It's just
right.
what we, we think they want.
Yeah, we're not giving them a chance to even understand, or certainly to articulate what they want, because we're making all of those decisions for them. We're
Right.
depriving them and ourselves of the agency to look at that whole situation honestly. Is this a relationship that makes sense for me? Or, you know, is this a connection that I value? Because we're working so overtime to finesse it and to live in facade and to adjust and micro adjust to anything that might be unpleasing to somebody. So
Right.
I think this is, you know, there are particular personalities who do this more than others. Not everybody resonates with this. I think there are women who are not that way as much as others. But for those of us, particularly who grew up in a certain flavor of dysfunctional home, and an alcoholic, addictive home, where, you know, you don't ask, don't trust, don't feel. These are the rules that you kind of learn to navigate life by, and it's really hard to shake yourself free of those when you come into adult relationships, and you're trying to navigate something that looks like being true to yourself, pursuing your own joys and goals in life, and developing something like self-love that like falls to the bottom of the priority list, really, for most of us.
Right, right. Do you think it's a question of agreeableness? Is it as simple as that personality characteristic? Like if we're more agreeable, then we're just inherently more people pleasing, and if we're more disagreeable, we just don't care as much about getting that approval?
Yeah, I think sometimes that can be dangerous, because you're engaging in some circular reasoning when you're looking at agreeableness and how it gets defined in a lot of the literature. So, you know, if I take a test that is looking for my big five characteristics, and I come out as very agreeable, how much of that is authentic agreeableness and how much of it is habitual agreeableness? Because this is you know, I live in this life that it seems like the only way I can get resources and get love and approval is to be very agreeable. And I've been doing that for so long that I really don't know the difference between that performance and the real self. And
Mm.
it's also the only way that I know how to ensure something that feels like safety for myself. So how much of that is real and how much of it is an artifact of discovering a strategy that has been more effective for getting things that make me feel safe and that help me avoid fear. And so, yes, to answer the question, it is something that affects agreeable people more than disagreeable people. But I don't think there are many women who are in this situation who are what I would think of as true agreeables in the big five sense of the term. I think of them more as people pleasers. And people pleasers start life off as parent pleasers. That's the way to think about that. And so you learned some adaptive strategies in a childhood and an adolescent environment that helped you get the resources that you needed and to feel safe in that kind of distorted environment. And you've just really never relearned other strategies in adult life for any number of reasons. You've continued to select into relationships and environments where being that really pleasing version of yourself has been the best among the strategies that are available to you. And so we get better and better and better at it over time until maybe, if you're lucky, you reach midlife and you have a little bit of a crisis around it. And that's kind of where I find myself. And I think a lot of people get to a point where it's like, this is a very childlike strategy. And it works, but the cost of this childlike strategy working is that I don't get to fully inhabit my life. I'm this permanent child. I'm this permanent, I'm always in this inferior childlike state relative to the other relationships in my life. And I think it's a stroke of good fortune to come to a point where that no longer fits and you're not able to handle that anymore. And it forces a confrontation and this really dark night of the soul of confronting what is self-love, what does it mean to individuate from this. It's not going to be a comfortable process, but it does contain the promise of individuation that gets you out of that child role. So
very interesting. What you're describing sounds kind of like it fits within the family systems, Murray Bowen family systems paradigm.
Oh, okay. I don't know it that well. Yeah, but I think this is also kind of, you're going to see this in a lot of different types of, old school psychological thinking that, evolutionary psychology is very allergic to.
Right. Allergic to. Yeah. And it's very interesting because the way you're describing the agreeable component, it sounds like a lot of lines are getting blurred between personality and coping mechanisms
and strategy,
and adopted strategies. And in family systems therapy, which I've learned a bit about over the years, the big ticket item in family systems therapy is self-differentiation. It's uncovering and figuring out who you are independent of that system, of that context. So that's really interesting. Well, just to get clear on some language here, I'd love to hear how you see the distinction between self-love and narcissism, because that's one thing that I'd really like to make crystal clear, to distinguish between those two, because narcissism is not something we're aiming for, but self-love is. So how would you distinguish between those two?
I mean, I think you lead into that with that description of this individuation process and this, separation from the family system, right? So narcissism is, I think of it more as this, your self-image only exists as a reflection of what you're getting back from the people who are around you. So you are recruiting all of the people around you to hold a mirror for you. They don't serve any other purpose other than that. They are just reflecting back your own sense of value and grandiosity and worthiness, and you don't allow the other people in your world to be themselves and to have their own sense of individuation. And in so doing, you also don't have your own because you're completely externally fed and sourced. So without that constant reinforcement and supply from these other people that you've recruited to your little narcissistic system, you cease to exist at all. So that's not what I'm talking about at all when I'm thinking about a true departure from a family system and from a true kind of coming home to yourself reclamation process. That is, I'm I'm okay and I have intrinsic value and worthiness and a sense of myself no matter what's getting reflected back to me. And no matter who, I don't make any demands on the people who are closest to me to reflect back to me in any specific way that is going to feel okay and safe. Like, even if they hate me, I'm still okay. Even if I'm disconnected, I'm still okay. And so I think unconsciously a lot of us are coming out of that, the family system that has led us into this pleaser role. We have been the mirror holder, and that's kind of the only way that we know how love works and that self-love works. And so we're going to find ourselves having narcissistic tendencies later in life. In addition to being the mirror holder for certain people, we're still kind of we're playing that role, and we contain the narcissist within too, where we're recruiting people to reflect back to us. And again, it's just this very immature, very childlike way of navigating relationships. And so I would distinguish that from a sense of mature self-love, mature kind of self-actualization as an adult. Like, I am sovereign unto myself, regardless of what these attachments are supplying me with or not. So I think it's a big difference.
Right, right. And I kind of see narcissism as, we want to be a big fish in a small pond, or well, we want to be a big fish. And so therefore the best means of ensuring that we're a big fish is to stay within a very small pond and kind of
Mm-hmm,
control our
mm-hmm,
circumstances as best
mm-hmm.
as possible to avoid any glimmer of indication that we're not everything,
Totally.
making
It's
ourselves
a
not to
very
be.
controlling, it's a very narcissists are incredibly controlling people. They need to know, they need to have a really good predictive sense of how other people are going to react to them, and how that's going to allow them to feel safe and to not have to confront their fear. And so, yeah, it can make the world into a very small pond indeed, because you're not actually capable of showing up in the moment vulnerably in a present way in your life. Because if you do that, you're not in control. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how people are going to react, and people might not like you, or they might give you negative feedback. And you're so afraid of that that you don't participate in life that way. You only participate in life in this very small, tight, controlled way. And that's what so many of us grew up with. That's why this is such a comfortable dynamic for us to fall into on one side of that equation or the other. And I think a big part of disentangling from it is not just, okay, I'm done with playing this little pleaser role, but also I need to see kind of the shadow of this in myself, and how I can also be not just the victim, but the victimizer in these systems. And I can so easily unconsciously replicate this unless I start to really pay attention to it. And none of that is real love with the other. And it's certainly not self-love.
Right, right. And I think kind of in your description, I think you're getting at a really important point, which is that we can be grandiose and even controlling without realizing it, without being having a high opinion of ourselves.
Oh, totally.
So
No,
like they say in
totally.
the 12-step programs, one of the pieces of terms that they throw around is that we think we're the biggest piece of crap that the world's ever revolved around.
Oh, I love that. I
And
haven't heard that one.
you
That's
haven't heard that
perfect.
one? Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's so
Yeah.
good. That's exactly what it is, and I
Yeah.
think people don't have a great intuition for that. If you go on social media and you hear all this talk about narcissists, and how to deal with narcissists, it's very in vogue right now to talk about these things. And everyone who's had a bad breakup thinks their ex is a narcissist,
I know, it's so
and,
true. It's
and
so true.
so this kind of idea that we have that, well, someone can't be narcissistic unless they have this really high opinion of themselves. We're not recognizing that that is an incredibly fragile, wounded person who is really feeling like an absolute piece of shit, and really tenuously connected to the reinforcing supply that allows them to feel okay temporarily, that they are utterly dependent on that. And then if we see it that way, we can see that in ourselves as well. We can see how dependent we are on the breadcrumbing and the affection and the attention and the the signs of approval and inclusion that we can get from other people in our lives. And we can see in our desperation for that, our own kind of narcissism. We just don't recognize it that way because we feel like such a victim and we feel so inadequate. But really it's the same dynamic. You're still making the same kind of emotional demands on other people that have been made on you for your entire life.
Right, right. And to stretch that mirror analogy a little further, I feel like a lot of times it takes me a little while to get an accurate impression of somebody. And in many cases it's almost the equivalent of trying to look through a window, but all I can see is my own reflection. I can't
Mm-hmm.
see through it to the other person because I'm
Mm-hmm.
so blinded by all my own emotional baggage. But your description of the narcissist as potentially, a sympathetic character who's just wounded and needs help. Again, I definitely agree that it's helpful just to look for all the parts of ourselves that do act in that way to a lesser extent, probably. But again, that kind of flies in the face of the evolutionary psychology conception of the narcissist as simply a highly disagreeable individual who isn't
Right.
really going to change. What's your take on that as far as whether, a true narcissist? Well, for one, do you agree with that description of a narcissist, simply highly disagreeable?
Well, I think, yeah, the way that it's usually bandied about in evolutionary psychology circles or behavioral genetics, big five circles, that would be the kind of very reductive way of understanding what, yeah, if we're going to describe a narcissist, what are we really describing? We're describing someone who doesn't have a lot of theory of mind, can't put themselves in someone else's shoes, is just very concerned about meeting their own needs and getting their own way, and essentially, yeah, a very disagreeable person. I think that is true as far as it goes, sort of like the question about, well, are agreeables, is people pleasing really just being agreeable? That, these are strategies. They're strategies to get resources and to avoid fear. And disentangling how much of the self and how much of the personality, even a personality that is very consistent over the course of someone's life, how much of that is baked into the DNA and how much of it is just this incredibly tenacious set of adaptive patterns that were laid down in early life and have been regrooved and regrooved and regrooved because we do select ourselves into relationships and environments that that it feels like a comfortable fit for those tendencies. Most of us are not actively seeking relationships where the relational dynamics are super challenging to the ways that we are most comfortable communicating or relating to people. We're feeling love, we're feeling comfortable, we're feeling happy in a situation that feels familiar to some degree. And so that's a way in which we just replicate again and again things that are already comfortable. So it's a really interesting question to start to even ask, how do you begin disentangling and disaggregating these things? Because definitely you look at big five traits and they are very predictive over the course of someone's lifespan. If we know how conscientious someone is, we can make pretty good, accurate predictions about their success in life, their credit score, their lifelong income potential. This works across, if we know how neurotic they are, we have a really good sense of how generally happy they're going to be. They're going to be less happy if they're more neurotic, all other things equal. And they're predictive and they're consistent. But that doesn't necessarily tell us that they bubble up out of the genetic code in this really immutable way. All it tells us is that they're consistent and persistent and predictive. And so I think there's a big leap that has happened with looking at the observed result and imposing a causal story on that, which is really, it's just one hypothesis among many. There are lots of reasons that people could have really stable personality characteristics that are not necessarily some sort of immutable genetic story. That's what we go to because that seems to make the most sense. But I think watching people who do engage in some kind of difficult individuation process later in life when they reach this crisis point, the midlife crisis point usually, and they do start to disengage from some of their most most baked in, most tenacious patterns, the ones that are most full of the self-sabotage and the defeated results that they've been experiencing their entire life, you do see people start to change. You see people start to relate in new ways and to choose different kinds of relationships. And I just don't think there's a lot of great, well-controlled literature that runs that as some kind of double-blind test against the genetic story. So it's complicated for sure. And I'm not, I don't think there's any benefit to anyone in oversimplifying it, because it's a complex set of forces, and it matters for happiness immensely.
Yeah, it's very confusing, and it's definitely a question I'm interested in because, as you know, I'm on the path to becoming a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
and I do wonder the extent to which a true narcissist, if there even is such a thing, can change or will change. Like I've dated a couple of people, at least one, who I do think would would meet the clinical definition of a narcissist.
Yeah.
And the impression that I had from him was that there wasn't going to be any remediating. There wasn't going to
Yeah.
be any changing, and that
Yeah.
the only thing that I could do and the only logical thing to do was to just detach and
Totally.
get out of his orbit. That
Yep.
was the only thing that was going to work. And I mean, I think people like him, I don't know. I wonder if they seek help. But and as a counselor in training, I've consulted on a couple of cases involving people who seem to be narcissists, and I find myself bringing this kind of fatalistic attitude, like good luck trying to change that person. That's not going to change. And so I just wonder, what's your take on that situation?
I think of it, um, since we're here on the posse, right? We can think of it like in terms of changing one's diet, and people who are resistant to changing over to a healthier lifestyle. They're eating a standard American diet full of animal products and garbage, and they're suffering various health consequences, and they're overweight, and they hate it, and they want to change, or they're on some continuum of wanting to change. But even some of the people who are stuck in that dietary pattern, who really do desperately want to change, they go spend thousands of dollars to go to the McDougall program or to True North or whatever it is. They find themselves reverting back to old patterns pretty quickly. And that's the norm. That's the most common story. The people who are really able to change a long-standing dietary pattern, even if they're under pressure from bad health outcomes that are challenging their life and maybe going to strip years off of their life, it's very, very difficult to change that. So I think of that as analogous. Like, first you have to want to change, which a lot of people don't
Right,
even, it's like, well, I'd rather die early than eat that bird seed. That's, you
right.
hear that all the time. And then even wanting to change, well, that's great, that's necessary, but it's not sufficient. There needs to be this, kind of set of X factors that enable the change. Or getting sober. How many times did I try to get sober from alcohol before I finally was able to pull that off, and to get more than a couple of months, many, many times, quitting cigarettes, anything like that. So it is these patterns, these relational patterns that we're in, whether they, one second.
Somebody's alive and kicking. What fierce protectors you have.
My goodness. They feed off of each other. So if one of them decides that something's going on, they will all go crazy. So there is, like, you fell into these relational patterns because they worked. They solved problems for you very effectively. They allowed you to get resources more readily, to avoid conflicts and fears that you didn't want to experience more readily. So they serve a really important function, and they have continued to serve that function over the course of your life. So can a narcissist change? Well, can a people pleaser change? I've certainly been aware of my codependent pleasing patterns since I was, first became conscious of them really as a teenager. And it has really taken me I don't know, 30 years to start to get my shit together on that score and to really start to make meaningful changes, because the pain of not changing became bigger than the potential pain of sticking with where or I guess I have that backwards. So the pain of staying in my old patterns was bigger than the potential pain of changing.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, well, I'm willing to start to run some experiments here and to start to see how this is going to go. All I know for sure is that I can't keep doing it this way, because it's not working, to the point of the pain has just become too much, and it's cutting me off from a life experience in a way that no longer feels tolerable to me. And so different people are going to experience that really differently. They're going to have different thresholds for personal pain and suffering, whether it's changing your diet or really confronting entrenched relational patterns. And then you still have to have some kind of, probably some good counseling, the will to do it, the ability to do it, the consistency, the support in your life to do it. There's just a million different things that are going to modulate someone's success with that and their ability to meaningfully change the way they go through life long term.
Right. Right.
So
It sounds so hard.
it
It all
is
sounds so
hard.
hard.
And
So
in most cases,
there's gotta be some joy in it somewhere. Like, how have these experiments been working out for you?
yeah, well, we've talked before, I think on the posse and certainly elsewhere, about my commitment to this radical honesty practice, which
Yeah.
I kind of see as a real key to navigating all of this. Like, if you have truth, and you have radical honesty, and that's your North Star, you don't need a whole lot else, because the decision that's in front of you in any given moment is really clear. Tell the truth or don't tell the truth. And usually telling the truth is going to be an extremely uncomfortable process, and it might blow up a given relationship. But that is the kind of brutally efficient and short way to start to discover what in your life is an artifact of pleasing, and what in your life is actually authentic and genuine. So that's been my method of choice for really trying to slice through the knot of this stuff. And I will say, with radical honesty, this is a phrase that comes from the author of the original Radical Honesty book, Brad Blanton. He calls it the cheap thrills of telling the truth. That there is this kind of I wouldn't be able to persist in a radical honesty practice if there wasn't a payoff associated with it, because it is very painful and it is very intimidating. But there's also an incredible exhilaration that comes from it. There's an incredible sense of self-love that begins to emerge and to bubble up, because you're developing this pride in your ability to be okay no matter what the outcome is. And so once you start to get a little taste of that and a sense of it, and this the feeling of freedom, probably for the first time in your life, if you have a set of behaviors that are like mine or like yours, which are this just incredibly restrictive, self-suppressive, I will give you whatever it is I think you want version of myself, and I have no idea who I am, that as you start to get in touch with the real self and to see her for the first time, that becomes really sustaining. You get really excited about learning more about that person, and uncovering more of her and allowing her more room to act and speak in the world. And so I think it does become this positive feedback loop once you get into it. If it didn't, this would be impossible work to do.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And it sounds to me like that radical honesty practice, it it enables you or requires you to not abandon yourself. You're staying
Yeah.
with yourself no matter what that truth is. And when
Yeah.
in the past maybe you would have wanted to distance yourself from that truth. I mean, you're an honest person, you're a conscientious person. What sorts of things, do you tend to be dishonest about?
It's more lies of omission than commission. So it's when so Gabor Mate has this exercise that he recommends that people do. This is the author of the latest book is The Myth of Normal. He wrote a very beautiful book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts about addiction. He's been in this space for a long time, kind of talking about the dangers of being overly pleasing and the consequent physical consequences in addiction, and also in his view, the manifestation in disease in the body. And he has an exercise that I've done a few times, which is very eye-opening for people, which is to keep a list throughout the day of all the times you wanted to say no but didn't. And so, and that can be something as simple as, oh, well, yeah, I'll call you later. We'll catch up later, but you really don't want to catch up later, but you're being polite. It's like all of these little self-betrayals. And it's incredibly instructive when you start to look at that and you start to realize, my God, I'm going through life not doing what I want to be doing. I'm doing what is expected of me. I'm laughing at someone's joke that isn't funny. I feel really resentful about a certain thing. My partner's not doing the dishes, but I'll just do the dishes instead of bringing this up because I don't want to feel like a nag, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not so much that I'm having these big lies about, I climbed Mount Everest last year or something like that. It's not like that. It's just these little self-betrayals of, I'm not going to show up for myself as the advocate that I could be. I'm not going to set a boundary that I might otherwise want to set because I just don't feel that if I do that, you're going to love me as much. Or I just don't feel if I do that, that I might forfeit that tiny little bit of approval and love that I feel that you have for me. And rather than risk losing all of that, I'm just going to do everything I can to defend it, even if it means I completely abandon myself. And that's, when you've been doing that since you were 4 years old, it's a really hard habit to break.
Right, right. So, I mean, how is it going? Have you felt more self-love? Have you felt more ease? Is the process becoming more comfortable?
Yeah, it's becoming more comfortable. I'm sort of running out of people to practice it with because everyone is leaving my life. It is, but it is, there is this trade-off between I know that I am not abandoning myself. I know that I am not betraying myself. And so even if it means it's going to be incredibly challenging to the other people that I'm close to, because people don't see this coming, they kind of got into a relationship with you based on a whole different set of assumptions. There's a different contract to that relationship. And when you start to do this kind of work, you are blowing up that contract and you're renegotiating the rules of this relationship. And most people are not going to be very excited about that because the cost benefit analysis for them has now been turned upside down. So they thought that they were getting into a situation with this very agreeable person who was, just a doormat for whatever their desires were, particularly if we're talking about a relatively disagreeable person compared to our agreeable, subverting, pleasing self. And so the threat to those relationships is going to be profound. And at best, it's going to really alter them. There's not going to be the same equilibrium of closeness and everything else that you were depending on. That's going to be incredibly threatening for you. It's going to feel really uncomfortable, but it's also in most cases going to cause people to back away. And I think I experienced a little bit of this in early recovery work when I first got sober, and it was sucky enough that that was why I abandoned a lot of recovery work. So I think of all of this as kind of individuation, self-love practice as really just an extension of continued recovery work that I've had on hold for a decade. I had this great quote. I think I mentioned it in the Village the other day from Russell Brand, where he said he avoided the fourth step like it owed him money. It's like you get a little ways in, and then you realize, okay, once I really start to unpack things and I really start to confront the shadows here, and I start to inhabit my life as an adult, which I've never done before, it's going to really destabilize everything that I depend on, all of my relationships, everything that I can count on that sustains me in a feeling of safety is going to fall away. And that's a big, heavy lift to ask anyone to do. So I think that's why a lot of us, we really can't get to that point until the pain has gotten big enough and we're secure enough in a midlife position that we're like, fuck it, what is there to lose? I have a really good sense of what the other path gets me. And I know that I don't want that anymore. And so I'm ready to take a risk on the unknown here, even if it's really scary and really uncomfortable.
And it sounds to me like you're laying the groundwork, or at least, tilling the ground for more rewarding, genuine relationships, people who
Sure.
have this new contract of honesty and disclosure, and people who don't expect you to change for them and they don't plan to change for you. And you're two adults
Mm-hmm.
doing your own thing, coming together by your
Yeah.
own choice rather than out of some desperate need for approval or connection.
And for relief, I think that
Yeah.
one of the things I've come to really understand is so many of us who had these really messed up childhood environments is that at some level we're just on the seesaw of fear and relief. There's really kind of nothing in between. We're either experiencing this really agitating fear that maybe we can identify and name and maybe we can't. We just feel fearful. And then there's something that allows us to feel relief. And whether that is we get a little sign from somebody that we're okay or we're approved of or we're not going to be rejected, or whether it's numbing with alcohol or food or something like that. It's just I'm just going to ride this little seesaw between fear relief. Like, well, it's not a life. It's really not a life. So expanding that into there are more colors in the universe than just those two colors. Like you can feel you can continue to feel attached to someone even if you have a disagreement with them. You can continue to have a relationship with someone even if it feels threatened temporarily. It doesn't have to put you into this complete all or nothing shutdown mode where either I'm being completely rejected and feeling incredibly afraid, or I'm self-abandoning and going into this pleasing mode to be something that is more appealing and pleasing to them. And so it just really opens up the possibility for every relationship in life, that instead of locking it into this model of this all or nothing kind of thinking, that again, it's very, very childlike, it's very primitive, it's there's more possibility out there for us. We just have to allow ourselves to experience a little bit of fear and discomfort getting there.
Right, right. A little bit, i.e., a lot.
A
But,
lot. Yeah. I think for years I've read about this kind of work and just been like, oh yeah, of course you're going to be uncomfortable. It's going to suck. But yeah, I really don't want to understate that. It's very sucky. It's very difficult.
and at the same time, the stakes are so high, because if
Yeah,
we are not ourselves, if we don't stand by ourselves, if we abandon ourselves, then what have we got? We've got nothing. We've got these tenuous, approval points from people who, float in and out of our lives, but we haven't got anything to stand on, to rest in, to
totally.
just own.
Totally. And those approval points can be taken away at any time. So we don't even get to enjoy
Anytime.
them and like rest
Yeah.
in the sort of, okay, I finally got the approval points, because you're always worried that, okay, if I make one misstep, or if I see something in their body language that puts me back into that fear space, now my only choice is again I've got to manage the situation. I have to fix it. I have to make
Yeah.
myself into this, whatever it is that my little correlations insist is what they want. And you're just never out of that space. So you can never relax. You can never feel safe. You can never
Right.
feel like I have arrived and I'm established no matter what. You're constantly living in this incredibly conditional, transactional kind of way with the people around you who are have agreed to the lie that you are offering them, and it's it's this really corrosive place to live. And I can see how someone like Mate gets to a theory of understanding these things where that's a layer of corrosion and self-abandonment that is going to generate disease in the body. I'm not sure how much of that I'm on board with, but it's an interesting way to think about it, where you can only do that for so long before it's going to show up and hit you over the head and say and grab your attention and say you need to change this or you're going to die.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, again, I relate so much to your description, that constant life was more exciting when I felt like my self-worth was on the line every moment of every day.
It's
It was
stimulating.
exciting. It was hyper stimulating, but it definitely kept me focused on just silly things and from thinking about my own priorities, my own goals, my own vision, what I actually wanted
Yeah,
in life. And it's just exhausting, that the hustle and shake. There's a song by
totally.
these Nashville twin sisters called Hustle and Shake, which is all about like, yep,
Yeah,
constant,
totally.
like the
Yeah.
dancing monkey, constantly entertaining.
My
So
my
how does, since we are on the vegan posse, how does veganism relate to your self-love?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it feeds into this idea of self-care and self-nourishment and like living a life that is not causing undue suffering and harming other beings. I mean, those are important things for what we might call in the evolutionary psychology world the self-esteem mechanism, this idea that I can be proud of those consumer choices I make or those food choices that I make. I'm not living out of alignment with those in some way that I feel that I have to misrepresent or lie about, or that I can there's this very the more I think about whatever this kind of journey is and however to put it in a little nutshell that we could describe, it's really making the insides match the outsides. You don't have anything to hide, you don't have anything to deceive or misrepresent. And I think definitely in my case, if I were not vegan, there would be a big disconnect between how I want to think of myself and how I want other people to think of me and my consumer choices around food. And so not having that disconnect and having that consistency is I see them related in that way. I think also a vegan diet sensitizes you to just the importance of love in general, of having love for the other and what real love looks like. And you're not making any sort of narcissistic demands on the animals. You're not they are not fulfilling some bottomless hole inside of you that you might be recruiting other humans in your life to fill. So being able to observe that and get in touch with that and recognize, okay, this is a relationship of unconditional love that I have for these animals, allows you to begin to step that through your life in other choices and how you eventually, hopefully, start to regard yourself as well. So, yeah, I see it as connected.
Yeah, I definitely see them as connected for all the reasons you described. But the vegan choice, of course, that also entails a big risk and a sacrifice. For
Yeah,
instance, I've had a number of women on the podcast who mentioned the challenges of dating as an ethical vegan.
yeah,
And, a number of women have gone so far as to say that they're pretty sure that being vegan is the reason they're still single.
yeah.
And, they may not be thrilled with that, but they're okay with it. So it's very interesting because I feel like that's one sector where the the self-love, the staying true to your own ethics and core values really can mean, sacrificing that relationship with, with a significant other.
Totally. Just that is when it is a core ethical conviction that you have and you've gone vegan for the animals and you run into somebody in a dating context who's like, oh, this makes me a little uncomfortable. And can't you just break the rules here and there? And, don't be so dogmatic. I don't find that attractive. Like the instinct that you might have, and I did in my early vegan days when, cost me a relationship. My boyfriend couldn't handle it at the time. And there was this negotiation of, okay, I can't stay true to myself on this principle and maintain this attachment. I have to choose between them. And that puts you back in this space of, I have to self-abandon or lose the attachment. Like it's this terror, it's this double bind, terrifying situation, certainly for a child to be in. And, as adults, hopefully we can recognize that I can lose that attachment and still be okay, but it's going to suck. And there are things that are more important than that attachment. Staying true to myself is this process of reclamation that is more valuable than an attachment to another who requires me to be a deceptive or less than complete version of myself. And that's the choice that we get asked to make over and over and over again. And it's not surprising that we go through life choosing the attachment rather than the principle, because we can't see that we would be okay without that attachment. And that's a little bit of an evolutionary psychology piece too, where in a Stone Age village, you are dead if you're not attached. You are dead if other people are not valuing you and taking care of you and seeing you as someone who is worthy of their love and attention. And so that sense of obligation that we have to continue to solicit that from other people comes from our ancestral history, just like it comes from our family environments. But for those of us who have both, I think it can be a particularly deep swamp to try to crawl out of, because we have these really ancient instincts that are like, don't upset the village because we're going to die. And then that got completely reinforced by family environments. And then we've gone through life in subsequent relationships that have reinforced it even more.
Yeah, there's so much to say on that topic. We a lot more to talk about. I have so many questions too, just about being a woman in this, very male-oriented world. But I think we made a good start in
Yeah.
unpacking some of the self-love concepts and ideals. And yeah, so thank you for joining me on this premiere self-love episode. Yeah, I encourage you to continue, thinking about it. Please reach out with any revelations or more turning points. And good to have you with me on the path to authenticity and
Totally.
just
No,
honoring ourselves.
this is great. As you say, the stakes are very high for all of us. And it is a choice, it's this kind of turning point, and life has presented us with that set of choices before, and we have made a choice that keeps us in attachment rather than keeps us in this adherence to principle and individuation. And so, yeah, I think at some point either you get there or you don't. And it's a journey. It's a process.
It's a journey, yeah. And I think for me, it's also just, trying to remember to have some fun along the way.
Definitely.
The rewards, like the big ticket item is love, true,
Yeah.
true love, the kind of love that we can only give ourselves. No one else
Yeah.
can give us that
Yeah.
love that we can give to ourselves. So thanks for sharing all that with me and being in this love space with me.
Love space.
And we will talk to you again soon.
Sounds wonderful. Thanks so much for having me on.
My pleasure.
All right.